When someone who once pulled away suddenly reappears, the first reaction is often excitement, curiosity, or even relief. But before responding, there's an important question to ask. Why are they back? Many people believe that getting a message after weeks or months of silence is a victory. In reality, the return itself means very little. What matters is whether anything has actually changed. In today's video, we're going to explore how to respond when an avoidant comes back, and more importantly, how to reject them the right way, not from anger, not from revenge, but from a position of self-respect, emotional maturity, and strength. Because the most powerful rejection isn't emotional, it's intentional. One of the biggest mistakes people make when someone returns after creating distance is treating the return as if it automatically erases everything that happened before. The moment a message appears, old emotions can quickly resurface. The silence is forgotten, the confusion is minimized, and the focus shifts entirely to the excitement of reconnecting. But this is exactly where many people lose their power. When someone chooses to step away, whether for weeks, months, or even longer, that decision has consequences. Relationships are built on consistency, trust, and emotional reliability. When those elements disappear, the connection changes. Pretending otherwise does not make the damage disappear. It simply ignores it. Many people are so relieved to see someone come back that they immediately make access easy again. They respond instantly, restart conversations, and act as if the absence never happened. Unfortunately, this sends a message that disappearing carries no cost. It teaches that someone can leave whenever things become uncomfortable and return whenever it becomes convenient, without ever addressing the impact of their actions. Self-respect requires a different approach. It requires acknowledging reality instead of avoiding it. The reality is that trust is not maintained through occasional appearances. Trust grows through consistency. It grows when someone shows up repeatedly, especially when situations become difficult. When that consistency is broken, rebuilding trust takes time. It cannot be restored simply because someone has decided to return. This does not mean becoming angry, bitter, or hostile. In fact, emotional reactions often weaken your position. The strongest response is calm awareness. You recognize what happened, you understand its impact, and you refuse to pretend that the past did not exist. That level of emotional maturity is far more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. A lot of people fear that setting standards will push others away. What they fail to realize is that standards are supposed to filter people. If someone is unwilling to respect reasonable expectations for communication, accountability, and consistency, then their departure reveals valuable information. It shows what kind of connection they were capable of maintaining. Ignoring that information only increases the chances of repeating the same cycle. Another important thing to understand is that missing someone does not automatically qualify them for another opportunity. Feelings and trust are not the same thing. You can still care about someone while recognizing that their actions created instability. You can appreciate the connection while also deciding that you deserve something more reliable. Those two truths can exist at the same time. People often assume that strength means refusing to care. Real strength is different. Real strength means caring while still protecting your standards. It means refusing to trade your peace of mind for temporary attention. It means understanding that being chosen after a period of absence is not necessarily a compliment. The real question is whether the behavior that caused the distance has actually changed. When someone returns, the goal should never be to reward the return itself. The goal should be to evaluate whether the return comes with accountability, consistency, and genuine effort. If those qualities are absent, then welcoming the person back exactly where they left off only reinforces unhealthy patterns. Your value should never be determined by who comes back. Your value was there before they left, it remained during their absence, and it exists regardless of whether they return. The moment you understand that, you stop seeing their reappearance as a reward and start viewing it as a situation that must earn its place in your life. When someone who once created distance suddenly returns, there is often a strong temptation to seek answers. Questions that have remained unanswered for weeks or months immediately come rushing back to the surface. What happened? Why did they leave? Why now? Did they ever truly care? For many people, the return feels like a rare opportunity to finally obtain the closure they have been searching for. The problem is that closure is often misunderstood. Many believe it comes from receiving the perfect explanation. They imagine that if they could just hear the right words, everything would make sense, and the emotional weight would disappear. But in reality, Explanations rarely provide the relief people expect. Sometimes the answers are vague, sometimes they are incomplete, sometimes they create even more confusion than before. This is why staying calm, instead of seeking closure, is such a powerful response. The moment you stop depending on someone else to explain your experience, you reclaim control over your emotional state. You are no longer waiting for another person to provide peace. You create that peace yourself. When people are emotionally attached to getting answers, they often enter conversations with hidden expectations. They hope for an apology. They hope for accountability. They hope to hear words that justify the pain they experienced. The danger is that these expectations give the other person enormous influence. Your emotional well-being becomes tied to how they choose to respond. If the explanation feels satisfying, you feel better. If it feels disappointing, you feel worse. Either way, your emotional balance remains dependent on someone else's behavior. That is not real closure. That is emotional dependence disguised as understanding. True emotional strength comes from accepting that not every question will receive a satisfying answer. Some people leave because they are confused. Some leave because they are afraid of intimacy. Some leave because they are emotionally unavailable. Others leave for reasons they may not fully understand themselves. Waiting for perfect clarity from imperfect people can become an endless cycle. Remaining calm changes the entire dynamic. Instead of approaching the conversation as someone searching for answers, you approach it as someone observing reality. You listen, you pay attention, you notice patterns, but you do not desperately chase explanations. This calm mindset allows you to see things more clearly because your judgment is no longer clouded by the need for validation. There is also something incredibly powerful about no longer needing someone to explain your worth. Many people secretly want an explanation because they believe it will confirm that they mattered. They want proof that the connection was significant. But your value does not depend on another person's ability to recognize it. Their choices reflect their own emotional capacity, not your worth as a person. When you stop seeking validation through explanations, you become much harder to manipulate. Excuses lose their power. Mixed signals lose their influence. Emotional confusion loses its grip. You are able to evaluate situations based on actions rather than stories. The strongest position is not one of anger, resentment, or emotional shutdown. It is a position of calm confidence. You understand that answers can be helpful, but they are not necessary for your healing. You understand that explanations may provide information, but they do not determine your future. The moment you realize that your peace does not require someone else's closure, you gain a level of freedom that many people never experience. You stop chasing understanding from those who created confusion. You stop waiting for conversations that may never happen. And most importantly, you stop placing your emotional well-being in someone else's hands. That is where real closure begins. When someone returns after a period of distance, one of the easiest traps to fall into is becoming captivated by words. A heartfelt message, an emotional apology, or promises about the future can create a powerful emotional response. After spending time wondering whether the connection mattered, hearing someone express regret or affection can feel reassuring. It can feel like confirmation that everything you hoped for was true all along. But this is exactly why it is so important to judge actions rather than intentions. Intentions are invisible. They exist inside someone's mind and heart, where no one else can fully verify them. Actions, on the other hand, are visible. They leave evidence. They reveal priorities. They show what a person is actually willing to do, not just what they say they want to do. Many people have good intentions. They genuinely want to be better. They genuinely want to maintain a healthy connection. They genuinely want to stop repeating old patterns. But wanting something and consistently acting on it are two very different things. Good intentions do not automatically create good outcomes. This distinction becomes especially important when someone comes back after creating distance. Often, there will be explanations about lessons learned, personal growth, or a new perspective. Sometimes these statements are completely sincere. Sometimes they are not. The challenge is that sincerity alone does not guarantee change. A person can sincerely regret their past behavior and still repeat it. A person can sincerely miss a connection and still be unable to maintain it. A person can sincerely promise something different and still fall back into familiar habits. That is why actions matter more than intentions. Actions provide proof. They show whether someone's words are supported by consistent behavior over time. One of the reasons people ignore this principle is because words offer immediate emotional comfort. It feels good to hear someone say they care. It feels good to hear promises about the future. It feels good to imagine that everything will be different. Actions, however, require patience. They require observation. They require time, and time often reveals what words try to hide. Someone can say they value communication, but do they communicate consistently? Someone can say they have changed, but do their choices reflect that change when challenges appear? Someone can promise commitment, but do they show up reliably when effort is required? These are the questions that matter. Another important thing to remember is that consistency is the true test of character. Almost anyone can behave differently for a few days or a few weeks. Lasting change is demonstrated through repeated actions, especially when circumstances become uncomfortable. The real measure of growth is not how someone behaves when reconnecting. The real measure is how they behave after the excitement of reconnecting fades. When you focus on actions, you protect yourself from becoming overly invested in potential. Many people fall in love with what someone could become rather than accepting who they currently are. They become attached to promises instead of reality. Unfortunately, relationships built on potential often lead to disappointment because potential is not the same as actual behavior. Judging actions instead of intentions does not mean becoming cynical or distrusting everyone. It simply means valuing evidence over hope. It means allowing reality to guide your decisions rather than wishful thinking. It means recognizing that genuine change never needs to be aggressively advertised because it naturally becomes visible through behavior. The strongest position is not rejecting every promise automatically. The strongest position is remaining patient enough to see whether those promises are supported by action. Words can inspire hope, but actions create trust. And when it comes to protecting your emotional well-being, trust should always be built on what someone consistently does, not merely on what they say. One of the most important things to understand when someone returns after creating distance is that not every return is motivated by genuine readiness for a healthy relationship. Sometimes the return is not about commitment, growth, or a desire to build something stronger. Sometimes it is simply about familiarity. Human beings naturally seek comfort, and familiar connections can provide a sense of emotional security even when those connections were never truly stable. This is why refusing the temporary connection is such an important act of self-respect. Many people mistake a return for a transformation. They assume that because someone has come back, something significant must have changed. But a return and a change are not the same thing. Someone can miss the comfort of a connection without being prepared to meet the responsibilities that come with maintaining it. Someone can feel lonely, nostalgic, or uncertain, and reach out simply because the connection once provided relief from those feelings. The danger is that this can create a cycle. The excitement of reconnecting often makes people overlook the reasons the distance happened in the first place. Old conversations begin again. Familiar feelings return. The connection feels alive once more. For a while, everything seems promising. But if the underlying issues remain unresolved, the same patterns often repeat themselves. What makes this cycle particularly difficult to recognize is that it rarely starts with obvious problems. In the beginning, there is usually renewed attention, increased communication, and a sense of hope. Because people want to believe that things are different, they focus on the positive moments and ignore the warning signs. They become emotionally invested before determining whether any meaningful change has actually occurred. Temporary connections often thrive on emotion rather than commitment. They provide moments of closeness without offering long-term stability. They create the feeling of progress without the reality of progress. As a result, people become trapped in a pattern where they repeatedly experience the highs of reconnection and the lows of disappointment. The strongest response is recognizing that emotional intensity is not the same as emotional security. Just because a connection feels exciting does not mean it is healthy. Just because someone expresses affection does not mean they are prepared to create consistency. Feelings can be genuine while still being insufficient for a lasting relationship. Refusing a temporary connection does not require anger or hostility. It is not about punishing anyone. It is about understanding your own standards and refusing to lower them for the sake of short-term comfort. It means asking a simple but powerful question. Does this situation align with the kind of relationship I truly want? If the answer is no, then continuing the cycle only delays your growth. Many people fear that walking away from a familiar connection means losing something valuable. In reality, what they are often losing is the illusion of what could be. They are holding on to potential instead of evaluating reality. They are investing in possibilities rather than evidence. While hope can be beautiful, it becomes dangerous when it repeatedly overrides experience. Choosing not to participate in a temporary connection is a sign of emotional maturity. It shows that you value long-term peace over short-term excitement. It demonstrates that you are no longer willing to trade stability for uncertainty. Most importantly, it proves that your standards are not dependent on who comes back into your life. The right rejection is not about making someone feel unwanted. It is about recognizing that access to your time, energy, and emotions should be reserved for connections that offer genuine consistency, mutual effort, and clear intentions. When you refuse to settle for temporary comfort, you create space for something far more valuable. A relationship built on reliability, trust, and emotional security rather than repeated cycles of hope and disappointment. One of the greatest misconceptions about rejection is the belief that it must be dramatic. Many people imagine that rejecting someone requires a long explanation, a powerful speech, or a detailed account of every disappointment and frustration they have experienced. They feel compelled to make the other person fully understand their pain before they can move on. But in reality, the strongest boundaries rarely come with lengthy explanations. They speak for themselves. When someone returns after creating distance, there is often a temptation to prove a point. People want to explain how much they suffered, how unfair the situation was, or why the other person no longer deserves access to their life. While these feelings are understandable, they can sometimes keep you emotionally attached to the very situation you are trying to leave behind. True boundaries operate differently. They focus less on changing someone else's understanding and more on protecting your own well-being. A boundary is not an attempt to control another person's behavior. It is a decision about what you will and will not accept in your life. This distinction is incredibly important because many people confuse boundaries with ultimatums. An ultimatum says, "You must change." A boundary says, "This is what I choose for myself." One tries to control another person, while the other establishes personal standards. The power of boundaries comes from their simplicity. They do not require endless debates or emotional negotiations. They do not depend on someone else's agreement. They do not need validation from the person who crossed them. Their strength comes from your willingness to uphold them consistently. For example, if someone repeatedly creates distance and returns only when it is convenient, you do not need a 20-minute speech explaining why this behavior is harmful. Your decision to stop participating in that cycle already communicates everything that needs to be said. Your actions become the message. Many people struggle with this because they fear being misunderstood. They worry that if they do not explain themselves thoroughly, the other person will never recognize their perspective. But emotional freedom begins when you stop making your peace dependent on being understood. Not everyone will agree with your decisions. Not everyone will appreciate your boundaries. Some people may even criticize them. That does not make them wrong. In fact, healthy boundaries often reveal who genuinely respects you. People who value your well-being may not always like your decisions, but they will respect your right to make them. People who only value access to you, however, often become frustrated when boundaries limit that access. Their reaction can tell you a great deal about their intentions. Another reason boundaries are so powerful is that they protect your energy. Every argument, every attempt to justify yourself, and every effort to gain someone else's approval requires emotional investment. Boundaries eliminate much of that unnecessary struggle. Instead of constantly defending your choices, you simply live by them. There is also a quiet confidence that comes from allowing your actions to speak louder than your words. When you know your worth, you no longer feel compelled to convince others of it. You no longer need lengthy explanations to justify your standards. You understand that your time, attention, and emotional availability are valuable, and you become more intentional about where those resources are invested. The strongest rejection is not an emotional outburst. It is not revenge. It is not making someone feel guilty. The strongest rejection is calmly choosing what aligns with your values and refusing to compromise those values for temporary comfort. When boundaries speak for you, they communicate self-respect, emotional maturity, and confidence without requiring a single dramatic speech. In the end, people may forget your words, but they will remember your standards. And when those standards are clear, consistent, and rooted in self-respect, they become one of the most powerful forms of communication you will ever have. When someone who once walked away returns, it can create a powerful sense of validation. Even if you have spent months healing, growing, and rebuilding your confidence, part of you may still feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that they came back. It can seem like confirmation that the connection mattered, that your presence was missed, or that your value was finally recognized. For a brief moment, it may feel as though everything you went through has been justified. But this is where many people face an important choice. They can continue seeking validation from the return, or they can choose growth instead. Validation feels good because it temporarily fills emotional gaps. It reassures you that you were important. It provides a sense of significance. It can even make old wounds feel less painful. The problem is that validation coming from another person is often temporary. If your confidence depends on someone else's attention, approval, or return, then your emotional stability remains connected to factors you cannot control. This is why growth is so much more powerful than validation. Growth is internal. It does not depend on who stays, who leaves, or who comes back. It is built through the lessons you learn, the standards you develop, and the person you become through difficult experiences. Unlike validation, growth remains with you regardless of what anyone else chooses to do. Many people unknowingly make the return of another person the center of their story. They spend months hoping for a message, imagining a reunion, or waiting for proof that they mattered. As a result, when that message finally arrives, it feels like the climax of their journey. But real personal growth changes your perspective. It teaches you that the return is not the main event. Your healing is the main event. Your self-respect is the main event. Your future is the main event. The moment you understand this, everything changes. Instead of asking, "Why did they come back?" you begin asking, "Does this align with the life I am creating?" That question shifts your focus away from their choices and back toward your own. One of the clearest signs of growth is no longer being impressed by attention alone. Attention is easy to give. Consistency is much harder. Anyone can return when they feel lonely, nostalgic, or uncertain. What truly matters is whether a situation contributes to your peace, stability, and long-term happiness. Choosing growth often requires letting go of fantasies. Sometimes people become attached not to reality, but to what they hoped reality would become. They hold on to imagined futures and idealized possibilities. When someone returns, those dreams can suddenly feel alive again. But growth encourages honesty. It asks you to evaluate the situation based on facts rather than wishes. This does not mean becoming cold or cynical. It simply means valuing your future more than your fantasies. It means recognizing that your emotional well-being deserves protection. It means understanding that not every opportunity deserves a second chance simply because it has reappeared. Perhaps the most powerful form of rejection is not saying no to another person. It is saying yes to yourself. It is choosing the habits, relationships, and environments that support your growth. It is refusing to abandon your progress for the comfort of familiarity. It is recognizing that your life has continued moving forward and that not everyone who returns automatically belongs in the next chapter. In the end, the ultimate rejection is not revenge, silence, or making someone regret their decisions. The ultimate rejection is becoming so focused on your own growth that you no longer need validation from people who once left. When your confidence comes from within, their return loses its power to define your worth, and that is when you truly become free.